Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for an industry chat here with Karyn Kent, Chief Executive of StudyAdelaide. We know universities and charities are providing much needed financial and social support, as well as the provision of food and basic needs to international students across Australia. And whilst international education is Australia's fourth biggest export, here in SA, where I'm based actually, it is the largest. So this support package that we're going to talk about today is critical to support not only students, but also those who work in the wider education sector. So to give you some context, on Tuesday, the South Australian government announced a new $13.8 million international student support package. And I thought it'd be a great idea to get Karyn on to an industry chat to talk more about this package and what it could look like for students who are wanting to access this support. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Karyn.
Welcome. Thanks, James.
Oh, cool. To start with, can you tell us a bit about the SA International Student Support Package that has been developed by the South Australian Government in partnership with the state's 3 public universities?
Yeah. So there's 3 components to the package. The first one is matching some support that had been announced by the university. So all 3 universities all 3 public universities had announced various hardship packages or various names of various packages of support for their students. So this announcement provides some funding to match those funds to contribute to that. The second component is a $500 cash grant to students who can demonstrate hardship that are not studying it with the 3 public universities. But I should also outline that students who have got on packaged pathway programs with those public universities will be taken care of by their universities. So for other ELICOS students, VET students, there will be the opportunity to apply for a $500 cash grant. And then for school students in South Australia, actually the support is going to homestay families in recognition of the huge amount of goodwill and support that these wonderful families provide international school students here. So obviously with students mainly not being at school at the moment, they're probably spending more time at home, probably eating more, the utility bills are going up. So, this is a recognition of like I said, the great work that these families are doing to welcome them into their homes.
Right. Okay. So we've covered off the students who are going to public universities in South Australia, and people who are going to non-public universities and education providers. The grant will also have some benefit to them. For the non-public university students, that includes, as I said, ELICOS, VET, also students at private higher education institutions. So at the private universities. So we've got Torrens here, we've got CMU, Carnegie Mellon University here, we've got providers such as Le Cordon Bleu, we've got providers such as ICHM, all offering higher education or university programs. So those students will be applying through StudyAdelaide is not administering them, but the Department of Human Services will be administering those grants, but we'll be working very closely with them to formulate the criteria. Okay, cool. So yeah, it sounds like quite a wide net, which is really good news. It's always a risk when developing these sorts of policies that there's always certain elements of the community that miss out. So it's nice to see that that's happened. The department, as you said, the Department of Human Services is administering the package in partnership with StudyAdelaide. What does the application process involve, and when do you anticipate students can apply for this?
So look, the underlying principle, of course, is that this is to support students facing financial difficulty or some hardship. So that'll be, a big part of the criteria. So we will be working closely with Department of Human Services to provide that guidance around the criteria. So to inform that process, we're looking at what the universities have put in place already to have some consistency, I guess, a consistent approach to that. And then feeding that back up through to the government to ensure that sits well with what they want to do. But as I said, the underlying principle is to really support students in hardship. So we really want to ensure that net is as wide as possible, as you said. At the moment, there's some information on our website, and that includes a link to register to receive an email once the registration's open. So we anticipate it will take about 2 weeks. It's not just to define the criteria, but also to build the system to allow Department of Human Services to process that and to, provide the data to help some of the verification process and things like that. So we anticipate in a couple of weeks, James, we'll be able to email all those students who registered and provide them with the detail, including a link to apply.
Yeah, it's not been an easy time for international students. So this is very timely. I was lucky enough to jump into your Q&A webinar last week. I got the end of it anyway. What are some of the urgent needs or concerns that you're noticing from international students that sort of led to something like this being created?
Yeah, so look, I guess since this, situation emerged, before I answer that specific question, I think in talking to all of our members and the providers, the number one concern has been the welfare of their students, right? So even when the borders close and obviously providers such as Ellicos and VET were going to be facing some tough business, conditions because they weren't going to be able to have those regular intakes over the next few months. The student welfare was their first and foremost concern. So that really, that was a key message we were feeding back to government. In the FAQ or the Q&A session last week, there was probably 4 categories of questions that came through. So the first one around education. So some questions around, are scholarships or discounts going to be available for my institution? So the message there very much has been, that's really something you need to speak directly with your institution about. Employment was another question, a whole range of things around employment, including to, what's going to happen at the other end of this. How can I continue to prepare myself or, improve those skills, that kind of thing. What's the ongoing support available? So that was definitely, and that goes to that welfare piece we've spoken about. So, what are those areas of support? And visas, a lot of questions around visas, which I'm sure the broader industry are also hearing from students. And I sit on the Global Reputation Task Force, and yes, these visa questions come up all the time from all sources. So, if I'm doing, for example, what will it impact my post-study work right visa if I'm doing a component of that online and offshore? So yeah, all the common questions that we would expect.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking, isn't it, to see the amount of questions about things that weren't really that big of an issue a few months ago. All of a sudden they're coming out. We did a phone call last week with Austrade's team and about 12 international students, or 10 of them. And it was a mixture of, work, mental health, visas, rental problems, so many, and they're just coming up, and it's not an easy time. So, I mean, let's talk about this package a bit more. Let's work out, so how many do you think will be supported by this package across South Australia?
Well, I guess it will come down to the criteria. So again, it will be about the criteria we put in place to demonstrate that financial hardship. So we'll be asking questions along the lines of, have you lost your job, or have your hours been reduced, and things like that. So we'll probably ask for some evidence around that. Look, probably the best indication I can give you at the moment is that we've had around 9,000 students register to receive the application form in, what is that, a day and a half, basically. So in 2 days. So I think, yesterday was huge. We haven't seen much. Yesterday was just the biggest day. So, and it started before, I think by 8 o'clock in the morning around, we'd had almost 100, and that was on the back of probably an overnight report from Adelaide Now. So that was before our student database had received notification. So as we know, word gets around pretty quickly in the student community. So
yeah.
So look, we anticipate that some of those won't qualify, and possibly, we don't know this yet, but we haven't got this level of detail. We really just asked for very basic detail when they registered, because we don't need to know this at this point. But there's probably some university students in there who will be redirected to obviously their university to apply for support, but or to seek clarification, I guess, as to whether qualify for some support.
Yeah, that brings me to my next question of, we've got these SA's public universities that have offered up their own hardship funds. Will this fund or this package remain separate, or can eligible students receive both from both the institution and from this fund?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's the kind of detail that's still being worked through.
Okay.
This all came about very quickly, actually. So that is definitely some of the detail that will be worked through by the universities and how this package works with their own packages. So I anticipate that, there won't be necessarily different processes. I would imagine that they would use similar, if not the same criteria for that to demonstrate hardship. I guess the only difference at the moment is I don't believe their pathway students qualify for the hardship, whereas now the universities will be administering this particular grant for their pathway students. So
That's interesting.
One particular difference. Yeah.
I didn't realise that they were excluded to begin with, so that's very interesting information.
I believe so. I mean, again, I haven't delved into the details of all those universities, but I believe that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all across the country. I think they're all putting something together, so it's not easy to sort of decipher it all. You did say recently that Adelaide's reputation as an international student city will be further enhanced by the care and concern demonstrated by government, education providers, and other organisations that support international students. Do you think Australia's image as a safe and supportive study destination will experience some long-term damage as a result of what's happened over the past few months or weeks, or perhaps a slow response to supporting international students as a whole?
Look, I think I think the first and foremost thing that we can do is express empathy with students, right? We need to acknowledge that they're scared, they're isolated, their world's been turned upside down, like many of ours has. But we're not necessarily living a long way from home, from families. So I think that's the first thing that we can do. I think there's a desire to see some quicker decisions, some decisions being made a little bit quicker, absolutely. And I think, some of the visa questions are probably the category that students are seeking clarification on. There's a huge cohort of students seeking clarification on visas. So I think there's a desire amongst the sector to see some faster responses on that. And I think we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out in terms of how that impacts us longer term, particularly when we're monitoring what other countries are doing, right, in terms of their announcements. But I think I have some confidence that there are some great people advocating for this sector at the highest level, and that they're delivering pretty clear messages around what else we might need to do, and to sort of, let's say, get some of those empathetic and caring messages through that we're all feeling for students. I think that the work that Australia is doing around the health and safety piece, in terms of managing this outbreak, let's use that to our advantage, I guess, in terms of continuing to position Australia as a safe destination. But I think, and particularly when we look at what's happening in other countries around the world, and we know that safety is continues to be a really important driver, right, for students and particularly their parents. So I think that that's something that we can point to as an advantage for Australia going forward. But I think we also need to just remind students that there are safety nets for them. Now that is not, there's not a one size fits all that's happening around Australia, as we know. But the federal government has come out with a $200 million fund to provide support through community groups. So I just hope that as an industry, we're all staying on top of what those particular support agencies and support levers there are to pass on to students, because obviously none of us want to see any of the students falling through the gaps. So
that was interesting that the federal government chose to involve those charities in their support package. I thought that was quite innovative, but I think that as this crisis unfolds, it'll be interesting to see whether or not those charities actually help those international students in the way that it was meant to happen. Yeah. It's going to be a curious outcome.
Look, I think the challenge for those charities is they've got, our international students are one cohort, right, of vulnerable, this vulnerable section of society. As we know, other temporary visa holders are also a category that doesn't qualify for the stimulus. So we've actually spoken to Red Cross and Food Bank and a couple of other agencies here, and you know, look, the people we speak to, they're obviously all, they want to support, they're in it for the right reasons. You know, they are there to support the vulnerable people in society that have been affected by this situation. So I think the goodwill is there, and that people are really bending over backwards in whatever way they can and with whatever resources they've got. You know, we've got, you know, our convention centre here, for example, has been preparing pre-packed meals that they're selling at a, you know, very much a, that they're actually feeding through to, pardon the pun, but they're providing through to, you know, charities at cost price. So I think there's a, you know, these times bring out some great community responses as well. So I think, you know, as long as we can communicate to students and direct them, point them in the right direction, it's not going to take them too many steps to get that support they need. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess speaking of bodies doing more than what they signed up for at the start, I'd love to hear what you feel about what Peter Mackey said the other day on our industry webinars, where he was talking about the role of study bodies, and he was talking about how, you know, they're evolving in their purpose and their need. And right now, Study New South Wales was now trying to offer welfare and basically help out with food and shelter for international students. Do you feel the role of study bodies is changing during this?
Well, I think it's evolving in terms of we're sort of pivoting more resources, I guess, to that student support. So, you know, we're all structured slightly differently. I mean, from Study Adelaide's perspective, we are, you know, we've always had two key areas of focus, one being destination marketing and the other being student engagement, right? So at the moment, our destination marketing activities are slightly challenged for obvious reasons, because we're not participating in any events at the moment. And obviously, I think we're all maintaining our digital activities, but so we can pivot those resources to our student support. So, and you know, all of my counterparts around us, we all have a slightly different role to do as well, right? In normal times, you know, we probably have more to do in that destination awareness piece than say, for example, New South Wales, you know, where most people in the world have heard of Sydney, right? So they generally put more of their efforts into that, I guess, student support piece. They have the funds available, you know, their partner funds that they have available. So, you know, we all have slightly different focus, I guess. But I guess at this particular time, we're all very much, you know, really pivoting to that student welfare, student support piece. And that's, yeah, manifesting itself in different ways, I guess, in the different states, again, depending on the various government or state and territory responses. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because of you know, I remember all these different study bodies appearing as a way to address the sort of grey area of student support and well-being, and then also destinations. And you're right, they're all set up very differently. It's fascinating to see how everyone's coming together, and every business in Australia is having to do things they have not had to do before. We've got a webinar next week with Rob Lawrence to talk about the future of education and how everyone's changing. So it's going to be an interesting, I think innovation is being forced upon everyone, whether they like it or not.
And, you know, that sometimes takes these things to make, to force change, right? And to find a better way to do and be more creative. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my last question is about overall how different state governments are looking at this same problem. I mean, early this week, we had the announcement from the ACT government about their $20 million Jobs for Canberrans fund that provide employment opportunities to the ACT public service, giving priority for those ineligible for existing government support. There's something similar happening in Victoria with their Working for Victoria program, where anyone with working rights can be sort of reallocated to in-demand industries, things like that. We've talked about sort of the eligibility of international students for the South Australian package and how that's all being worked out. But do you feel like something like that will appear or will likely appear in the future in South Australia?
I think that governments will continue to look at are really now looking at all areas. So I think their initial focus was addressing looking at the big rocks, right? So where is the biggest need first and foremost? And I think that's what they've been focused on. And now there is the opportunity to have those conversations for cohorts such as temporary visa holders and things like that. So I think that opportunities still exist to have those conversations. I think Tasmania actually announced something today, James, very similar to what's happened in the other states around, maybe perhaps similar to what, a little bit similar to perhaps what the NT have done. So yeah, look, all states are looking at that, and I think the opportunity exists to keep talking about it. I know certainly from our government's perspective as well.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely fantastic news, and congratulations on getting that that package across the line. A lot of international students and the sector at large will be very happy with that news.
I'll take all the credit. I should make the point that it was very much a destination approach, which was actually really, I think, a really exciting. You know, there was the vice chancellors of 3 universities had been speaking to the government at the highest level. You know, the Department of Trade and Investment, who we work very closely with here as well, and our minister, you know, has an industry a forum to engage with all the sectors of the industry. So. Yeah, I think it was very much a Team Adelaide approach in this respect, and yeah, we're very happy with the outcome.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, James.
Cheers.